What's going on, everyone? I'm Sage, bringing you more information from the Shadowlands beta. In this video, I will be going over a more in-depth guide for the Mythic plus Feral Druid and the value that Druids can bring in this environment. Now, before we go too far into this guide and I start losing myself in an attempt to make everyone see the untracked value of Feral Druids, I have been playing this game for a massive amount of time, and I know what people tend to think about the spec, as well as the Mythic Plus content as a whole, so let's get some of this out of the way first. Quick disclaimer for this video is that it is obviously a very long video because I wanted to make sure that I gave my opinion on most of the factors that play into the Mythic Plus dungeons. So I go over all the talents, builds, stats, enchantments, utilities, legendary synergies that I use, and there's even more than that that's inside this video. So if you don't want to know a specific topic of this, or you don't think that you need to know any more on the specific topic of this, and you just want to get straight into like the utility that Feral brings into a dungeon, or maybe some of these synergies or talent builds, so on and so forth, the timestamps for those will be in the description below, as well as they will show up on the video timeline. So feel free to skip the topics that you are more interested in. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this video and get things started. So first, for Mythic Plus this season, will Feral be meta? No. Hell no. We are not. And it's not just because we are actually Feral Druids. So being in a meta in Mythic Plus comes from finding the most optimal synergies within a class, as well as the synergies that that class has with other members of a group to not only optimize damage, but survivability and speed, all of which are needed to do high-end Mythic Plus. However, do you have to be one of these most optimal classes to do very good in Mythic Plus? And the answer is no. If you are going for MDI or the highest key of the season, then yes, you might have to look towards the meta specs. However, if you just want to do well in keys and have a high IO score, then no, you do not have to be a meta spec to achieve this. And several people have proved this over the last several seasons of Mythic Plus, because it's not just down to your class, but the group you play with as well. So don't give up on a player just because they're not listed as meta, unless you are reaching for those mega high-end achievements. Also, more often than not, a player that plays a class they enjoy and know well will perform better than someone who just chooses a class because it does high damage easily. So now that I've gotten the defender of the non-meta specs out of the way, let's take a look at some of the other aspects of Shadowlands Mythic Plus that not only heavily affect Feral, but all melee. The first of all of these is the Aoe Cap. Now, for Feral Druids, we do have two abilities that remain uncapped, which is a huge plus that is in our favor. However, spam abilities such as Swipe, Brutal Slash, and Shred are capped. Swipe and Brutal Slash are capped at 5 targets, and Shred, of course, is our single target spam. Most other melee specs have received a harder cap than we did, limiting them to only about 5 to 8 targets for most specs. This ultimately means that ranged are going to be favored because of their ability to mass AoE, so pulls will still remain the same, just with more range focus than melee focused. Next up on the hit list for melee is the new affix Storming and Spiteful, which are highly melee unfriendly. Storming summons tornadoes that will circle the ad they spawn from, forcing melee to have to move out for them or hope the tank moves the mobs away from the spawn locations. These tornadoes spawn extremely frequently and not only damage you, but also knock you into the air. The other affix, Spiteful, spawns a fiend that rises from the corpses of non-boss enemies and pursues a random player. So this means that when an ad dies, there is a chance that the melee standing right on top of that corpse will be fixated by the spawn and start to take some massive damage. So once again, this gives even more value to range players because they will be able to avoid these two new affixes very easily. So if we tie these last two big negatives, being AoE capped and bad adaptation to the new affixes, you can start to see why range will be favored for the season. But wait, there's more. The new seasonal affix is called Prideful, which summons a big red Pride Boy, which will spawn once you reach 20% of the enemy forces count, and every 20% after that. This is the same functionality as the seasonal affix Reaping that we had in the past. The big red Pride Boy does pulsing AoE damage, as well as he will place a 4-point cursor on a target that will then launch from that target and shoot in directions that it is pointing. If this hits a player, it will stun them and do a decent amount of damage. So for this, you will have to make sure your group positions itself to avoid it. In most groups, it was better for the affected player to stay still, while the others made sure that they were safe from its effects. The Pride does, however, give a Kiss Curse play where once you kill the Pride, you'll gain a massive buff, increasing your damage and healing by 30%, your movement speed by 60%, and restoring 5% of your maximum mana every 1 second for a minute. So why does this give value to having range over melee? Well, it should be obvious, but it's because you can pull a huge pack of adds where your ranged players will be uncapped doing mass AoE damage and have a huge damage buff to quickly burn down groups for percentage. If anyone tuned into the recent Keystone Masters, they will have witnessed this AoE destruction firsthand. The last big downside to being melee in a Mythic Plus environment is, have you ever seen a tank start kiting a mob and a melee just get deleted? This is because there are several mobs that will attack targets within range of them, even if they are not the target with threat, if the main threat target is too far away from them. This is mainly in the game to prevent tanks from just pulling and kiting everything till it dies, but it does have the chance to annihilate melee classes if you are not careful. In BFA, the most notable mob that did this was the guards in Ataldazar, which hit the tank very hard, and when the tank started kiting, it hurt the melee a ton too. In Shadowlands so far, I've noticed this effect with the Bear Hound type adds in the Halls of Atonement, which the tank will want to kite because they do enrage and do a massive amount of damage to the tank. Alright Sage, come on man. All you're doing is stating how bad melee are going to be in Shadowlands Mythic Plus, and Feral is a melee class, so they're going to be horrible in Mythic Plus as well, right? So yes, I did want to mention all of the obstacles that melee face in the Shadowlands. However, this won't stop melee from being brought in Mythic Plus, and as a Feral Druid, you have uncapped AoE, which means this will be less of a shitfest for us than most concerning the AoE cap itself. The new affixes sucking for melee also will not be on every single week, and you can play with them. It's just melee have to do more to survive them than most, but it's really only those two affixes. The Pride giving a buff to uncapped range players is a huge gain for them in big pulls. However, most Prides will be spawned for boss fights, which can definitely play better into the melee specs versus the range on single target boss fights. The kiting issue with melee and tanks has always been there, so that's definitely not going to be the reason melee aren't brought either. Alright. Now let's get into what this video is mainly about, and that is the Feral Druid in a Mythic Plus environment. And to start that off, I wanted to go over the damage profile that we bring to the table, how to line up burst with cooldowns, and quickly get bleeds up and rolling. So the damage profile for the Feral Druid is snapshotted bleed damage while weaving in huge bite damage when all dots are activated and rolling. The main takeaway people need to see is that most bleeds do not do a ton of damage unless they are on several targets and if they last for their full duration. Also, you will still want to put up your bleeds when damaging a target because they will enhance your bite damage through a conduit called Taste for Blood, which increases your ferocious bite damage per bleed you have on the target. Alright, so I wanted to take this chance to start going over some of the builds and abilities that we're mainly going to be using inside the Mythic Plus scenario, how some of them synergize, and what we're going to be using to start building up those damage profiles inside the Mythic Plus scene. Because this is going to be our total damage scenario, and a lot of that reflects off of what covenant you are, what talents you selected heavily, and then what legendaries you have equipped, as well as your stats and so on and so forth. So let's start looking over the talent builds that we're going to be going with, and we're going to be looking at purely the Mythic Plus scene build, and for most Mythic Plus, you're definitely going to go with Predator. We will talk about some of the other hybrid builds that you can go with. However, first up, let's go with the main build that most people will be running inside the Mythic Plus environment. So first up, we have Predator, and Predators, every single time something dies, while you have a bleed on it, it'll give you a reset of Tiger's Fury, which Tiger's Fury gives you 50 energy, and it gives you a damage enhancing ability that will snapshot onto your bleeds as well. This is baseline at 15%, however, we have a conduit called Carnivorous Instincts that's available to every single covenant that baseline increases it by 3%. Up to 18%. So if you look at my tooltip currently, I have an 18% increase on Tiger's Fury, and that will scale up as you get increases of Carnivorous Instincts, which is going to be huge in the Mythic Plus scene. It's huge everywhere, actually. This is pretty much a guaranteed conduit that you will have to take because of its extreme damage output, because it's just a flat damage increase for 15 seconds every single time you have Tiger's Fury up, and then Tiger's Fury is up a massive amount of time inside the Mythic Plus scene. Somewhere in the range of about 80% is typically what I've seen, because you get all those resets as long as the dungeon is moving at a pretty fast pace. So Predator is definitely going to be the go-to here. It will give you all of that energy back as well, and we'll talk more about the energy pool that we have, because if you see on the screen, I have 190 energy pool. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But next up, we have the 25 row, which gives you Wild Charge, Renewal, or Tiger's Dash. On this row, the best one by far is definitely going to be Wild Charge because of all the different capabilities you can have with it. The main one, obviously, leaping to the target and leaping behind them, allows you to catch up with the tank, or just get to a target that you need to, close those gaps, as well as in travel form, it lets you leap, resetting fall damage, but also jumping forward pretty damn fast, which definitely helps you keep up or move fast with inside the dungeon. All of the other ones are pretty nice, and you definitely can macro it into where in human form it lets you jump to a friendly target if you need to get to them. That is a great way to use it as well. And then Boomkin obviously lets you jump backwards if you really need to do that as well. You do have to have the balance affinity to be able to do the Boomkin jump backwards, but we're probably going to take that on the next row anyway. So getting down to the next row, we have balance affinity, you have guarding affinity, and you have restoration affinity. And now throughout all of these ones, we get different abilities. Before, we were able to select Typhoon separately, independently from balance affinity. Now it's tied into balance affinity. So we're going to select balance affinity the majority of the time in most scenarios because it gives us 3 extra yards, which not only enhances our mass AoE that we can do, but it's extremely convenient when dodging mechanics such as storming that we previously talked about, because it gives you that extra range to kind of move away from the main target but still be attacking them. There are definitely bosses where this came into big play, like the Sharknado boss inside Freehold, because when he did his Sharknado, you could actually stand right outside of it and still completely damage him while he was just sitting there spinning, which was a great bonus benefit for Feral Druids. So in most scenarios, you will take the balance affinity, and this will actually tie into other talents we'll talk about here in just a second. However, the other ones are great, especially Guardian affinity is very strong, having Frenzy Regeneration and Incapacitating Roar, but also because it gives you that passive reduction in damage. So this will probably play more so when you get into those higher level keys. Then you want to have some extra damage reduction. Versatility gear is great for that, but going Guardian affinity just gives you that extra tankiness if you need it. Restoration affinity is definitely great inside Mythic Plus as well, because not only do you get Yourselves Vortex, which is a really good CC, because you can throw it down and it will suck all of the adds back to your Vortex. So if your tank is kiting to get rid of Necrotic, or because there's adds that are just enhanced, you know, maybe you got Inspiring and they're all running after him, or you got those hounds inside Halls of Atonement that just get massive because they're going berserk, and you can't de-enrage all of them, so you might be able to throw this down and snap them back into a location. Last time I used that on the dogs, it actually didn't stop them from moving, but it did stop everything else from following the tank. So great utility there, as well as you get those extra heals. And we'll have a discussion about the healing from the Feral Druid a little while later. So on this next row right here, we have Mighty Bash, Mass Entanglement, and Heart of the Wild. Mighty Bash is a decent talent because it allows you to have that one single target stun. However, there's a lot of mobs in Shadowland dungeons that you cannot actually stun. Mass Entanglement has its very niche situation, and we can definitely see that, like in a Tal Dazar when you're fighting the princess, the ad that she spawned up, you could mass entangle that and keep that entangled forever. I haven't really seen any ad inside the Shadowlands dungeons where this will come into play in that way. However, there are definitely scenarios if you can CC a target, if you put like a single target root on an inspiring mob, the tank pulls all the other mobs away from the inspiring one, and then you have this one as an insta cast, so you can just insta cast it on it whenever you need to. That might be a way to play that inside the inspiring affix. However, for mass crowd control with an entangling roots, it's going to have to be a very niche situation in order for you to use this in Mythic Plus, and there definitely might be a scenario where this is great for that. The last one is Heart of the Wild. This is a big ability that definitely came to us. However, it has a very niche situational use as well. And if you've watched some of my previous videos, I have utilized this ability, but mainly with Night Fae, because you can tie Heart of the Wild, Balance Affinity, and Convoke the Spirits to do a massive amount of Boomkin abilities, and that also includes Sunfire, Moonfire, and Starfall, which is big AoE damage that you can get, and this is probably the largest enhancer to an AoE profile that we can do outside of just our regular uncapped AoE abilities through our bleeds and our Primal Wrath, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Inside a Mythic Plus environment, like I said, the only time I think this will ever be taken is if you're Night Fae and you're rolling with it so you can do some big AoE. Even on single target, it would not be the choice to take because you're going to be able to do more damage just in your fertile spec than you will be with this Boomkin ability. The next row, I would still say Soul of the Forest is our go-to. I've said it in my previous videos as well. And Soul of the Forest is very good, especially at the start of expansion when we're still working on getting our stats back up, because Feral Druid is very stat dependent, especially at the start of an expansion, because we do not have a lot of crit, meaning we're not generating a lot of combo points, meaning we're using a lot more energy to actually get full 5 combo points to use abilities. And so it starts off with a slow rotation that eats up a ton of energy to get some damage out. And as we get more crit and some higher mastery, that'll start to even itself out as the expansion goes on. However, using your energy to spawn Savage Roar, you're going to spend more time trying to get Savage Roar up than you are utilizing its damage potential, because then the mobs are already going to start dying by the time you have Savage Roar up. Or you could have Savage Roar up going into it, but your overall damage is going to be spent a lot on keeping Savage Roar up than it is just pushing out the damage. And that's why Soul of the Forest is very strong right now. Savage Roar, I do believe, and I do think it will actually come into play later on in the expansion once we have more gear, especially for single target scenarios, and it could definitely come into play inside dungeons, but we need to have that crit. If all we're doing is spending 3 GCDs to get Savage Roar up, then at the beginning, when we have a ton of energy, because the energy build that you guys see me utilizing right now, plus the legendary we'll talk about here shortly, you will have enough energy to absolutely have Savage Roar up and rolling, and it will be up and rolling for your entire burst window, and then you can have it up right at the end of it to just keep your damage flowing, and that energy regeneration flowing as well. So later on in expansion, once we have a little bit more stats, Savage Roar definitely could come into play for this, but Soul of the Forest is by far the easiest and the most beneficial, in my opinion, currently. Incarnation King of the Jungle is just not the cooldown that it used to be because of the way that they changed Berserk. So what they did is they pretty much took all the damage potential from Incarnation and they threw it into our Berserk, and they took the energy reduction ability, nerfed it, and then threw it inside Incarnation. Berserk now, which is our big 3-minute cooldown, is go Berserk for 20 seconds, causing Rake and Shred to deal damage as though you were from stealth, and giving finishing moves a 20% chance per combo point spent to refund 2 combo points. So mainly the damage potential from Shred and Rake were removed from Incarnation and thrown in there. The combo point one is just flat new. And then Incarnation now just gives you 10 more additional seconds because it increases your Berserk to 30 seconds while Incarnation is active, and it makes all of your cap form abilities reduced by 20% in their energy cost, and you're allowed to use Prowl once while in combat. So the only thing you're really gaining is 10 seconds of Berserk and a little bit of energy regeneration from your abilities, because you won't have to spend as much on your abilities. It's just not enough, especially comparative to the other one. Since this is a 3-minute cooldown and it only lasts 10 seconds more, you're only gaining a very small portion compared to the other 2 talents on this road that will last the full duration of a fight. Something needs to happen in Incarnation in order for it to be chosen. This might still be chosen in PvP just to kind of even out some of the burst situation issues with Berserk. But other than PvP and strictly just burst damage, I don't believe that Incarnation is going to be taken over the other 2. So moving down to the next one, Primal Wrath is our go-to. There's no doubt about it. The other 2 are not even a thought when it comes to AoE. Primal Wrath is one of the best things that Feral Druid has going into this expansion because it is 100% uncapped, meaning that you can AoE rip everything as well as do that initial AoE damage to everything. And that is very, very powerful because not a lot of classes can do it. And even though this is a bleed, so it does do damage over time, so it is kind of a ramp up damage ability, this will actually start to carry your damage inside dungeons, and you will not start at the very top because it's not an Eye Beam. It's not going to do all of its damage right up front within a matter of seconds. It'll do it over time. But while it's doing it over time, you're also doing additional damage to amplify it while it's going. And at the end of the fight, you are sitting up there at the top. Not always, obviously, but it does give you a massive amount of damage over time, especially if the ads stay alive for a chunk of time. So this is by far your best go-to. This is going to be for cleave, and it's going to be for mass AoE. Brutal Slash is not as strong as it really should be, because even if you look at the damage, strikes up to 5 nearby enemies with a massive slash, inflicting 1,399 physical damage, right? This is based off of this character's current gear, so that's what it's at right now. If you look at Primal Wrath at 5 combo points, its initial burst damage to every single target is 805. So you have 805 versus the 1300, right? All right, so there is a decent amount of damage there. However, we're not taking into fact that this is a finisher and this is not, meaning that this right here is also going to get the 5% enhancement from Soul of the Forest. So now you're going to add that 5% onto the 805, and then you're going to compare the two. And it's just not enough, especially when that's just a burst damage. You're comparing just the initial burst damage of Primal Wrath to the full damage of this ability, because that's just the initial damage, meaning that it's not taking account of obviously the 12-second rip damage that goes across that target either. So there is just no comparing these two when it comes down to just straight damage. Also, this one you can spam out every single time you got combo points. This one you can't because it's on a charge system. 3 charges, right? And then we come over here to this dead talent, and what it does is when you throw Thrash on targets, it makes swipe cost less energy per the amount of targets you've hit. It's not worth it at all, because swipe is AoE capped and Thrash hits like a wet noodle. It's literally just a damage modifier bleed is what it is. You're not doing it for its damage, you're doing it for the modification of what it does. Granted, 1 GCD to put this AoE bleed across everything does add up a little bit more than using that damage on a shred, depending on how many targets you have. So it has its benefit in that aspect, but it's very weak bleed, and then swipe is capped. So this ability right here is not going to see the light of day inside this scenario, especially when compared to Primal Wrath, which is 100% uncapped, and the amount of damage that it does place out. So on this row, let's not even talk about it anymore. Go with Primal Wrath, do yourself a favor. The last row, there is some decision making here inside a Mythic Plus environment, and it really comes down to where you're sitting with your stats, how fluid is your rotation, and can you keep your rotation going with the energy that you have. And if the answer to any of that is no, I don't have a fluid rotation, no, I don't have enough energy to keep everything going, then I would highly recommend going with Moment of Clarity. And Moment of Clarity, what it does is your Omen of Clarity, which is the ability that allows you to just cast free abilities, triggers 50% more often, and you can stack it up 2 times, so it can proc and you can save 2 charges of it, and it increases Shred, Thrash, or Swipe by 15%, as well as giving 30 more energy to your maximum energy pool. And that's pretty huge, because not only is it saving you energy by allowing you to have Moment of Clarity up more often, but it's also increasing your damage of 2 of your AoE abilities, because you still are going to use Thrash, and you're still going to definitely use Swipe inside AoE. That's your spam ability in AoE. And then it's also allowing you to have even more energy that you can store and utilize, which is huge. And this ability is great when you're stat deprived like Feral Druids are at the beginning of an expansion. Blood Talons, their new Blood Talons, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it still does 30% increase to your next 2 rips or your next 2 ferocious bites. So it's relatively low maintenance to actually keep it up. You do have to kind of work it in and make sure that you have enough energy to cast those 3 abilities really quickly. With the energy build I currently have, it's not a problem really. However, it does not help you accumulate any of those resources. So going with Moment of Clarity and allowing to get more damage abilities out more consistently gives you more damage than the 30% over those 2 abilities will do. Blood Talons will definitely be the go-to for more than likely inside a raid environment where you have a lot more single target than you do AoE, and you definitely would sacrifice some of the energy regeneration you get from the Moment of Clarity build to go with the Blood Talons inside that environment. And later on, once we have more gear, once we get some of the passive haste from more gear, as well as crit is going to be the biggest changer to swapping from Moment of Clarity to Blood Talons, because the less combo point generated abilities you have to use to get to 5 combo points, the less energy you need. And that is the big thing with Feral Druids, is crit comes into play very clutch with us, because the more crit you have, the more chances you have at getting that additional combo point, the less energy you need to actually put out damage. And that's the point of crit. Yes, crit does allow you to do bigger damage. You know, the chance of having those things critically hit, especially Ferocious Bite critically hitting, is a big portion of our damage. But when it comes to energy resource generation versus combo point generation, then crit's going to play huge into both of those because of what we just talked about. More crit, more combo points, less energy needed to put out damage. And then you can swap from Moment of Clarity into Blood Talons. Regrowth Frenzy is a very strong ability. They did buff it up, and it is a bleed that you can place on the target for 6 seconds, and it does add to the taste for Blood Conduit we were talking about, giving you additional damage if you throw out a Ferocious Bite at the end of the 5 combo points that it gives you, which is definitely a way to enhance this. It is very much a burst ability. It's on 45 seconds, which really sucks. 25 energy though, which is pretty nice. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, in a Mythic Plus setting, I would not use this ability, at least not currently. There are some fights where there are some damage enhanced phases, like the first boss in Mist of Turnasai. Once you free the tree dude, you can go ham on the Drust boss that's right there, and he takes increased damage while the tree dude is channeling on him, and you can do some big bursts with that, but the rest of the dungeon, it's not going to pay for itself to be on your build, especially not compared to the other two talents on this row. So we're going to go with Moment of Clarity or Blood Talons, all right? That's going to be our main build. The reason why I selected this build also is because I'm using the Cat Eye Curio Legendary, which if you haven't heard about the Cat Eye Curio Legendary, this is what it is. Your clear casted abilities generate 25% of their energy cost, and your maximum energy is increased by 60. So you see a trend here, right? All of the things that are making us better at the start of the expansion have to deal with resource generation, not the amount of damage we're amplifying abilities, but the amount of abilities we can actually chuck out, right? And that's always been the big thing with Feral Druids at the start of an expansion is we have a very hard time at the beginning of expansions having enough stats to have resources to get damage out. So this Cat Eye Curio Legendary also synergizes extremely well with Moment of Clarity, because this Legendary is saying that those clear casted abilities generate 25% of their energy cost, and Moment of Clarity makes that happen 50% more often. So every single time Moment of Clarity procs, does it 50% more often, has 2 charges, and increases damage, but now you're also getting 25% of that energy back as well. Even though it was free, you're getting 25% of that energy back as well, on top of having an increased energy pool. So right now I have 190 energy because I'm tying in the Moment of Clarity with the Cat Eye Curio Legendary. And then you stack those up also with Soul of the Forest, which gives you 5 energy per combo point spent on your finishing moves. So that's 25 energy every single time you use a finishing move, and then you're getting 25% of the energy cost back on all your clear casted abilities, and then your clear casted abilities happen 50% more often, and then you also have 190 energy. So there are times when you're actually pressing abilities and you're hitting finishers and your energy bar is actually going up and not going down because you're getting so much energy back, which is awesome. And it definitely feels good to play with because you can sit there and utilize your abilities. And there's very few instances where you don't have the energy to do what you want, especially if you take the biggest energy gain, which is Predator, which Predator giving us that 50 energy back when we use Tiger's Fury when something dies. Now that we have 190 energy, you can store it, meaning you're not overcapping on energy as often, and you're utilizing that to be just capped out on energy all the time, so that pressing your abilities or not having the resources to press your abilities never becomes a problem. And once you start getting to the point where you are just overcapping on energy consistently, that's when you need to start thinking of, okay, hey, do I need to drop the Moment of Clarity talent for Blood Talons for increased damage? Or hey, maybe I need to drop the Legendary for a damage modifying Legendary like Predator instead, all right? And we'll talk about the Predator Legendary here shortly as well. So that's all the energy regeneration that I recommend for Mythic Plus. But there are some other things that you can do, and there are builds out there that people can play with that might come ahead. I'm not sure if they will or not, but we'll go over them just for the sake of argument inside the Mythic Plus scene for Feral Druids. And that is, we have a conduit right here called Incessant Hunger, which rip damage has a 10% chance to grant 3 energy. Now you got to think with this tied into Primal Wrath, which does an AoE, a mass uncapped AoE, across all targets, will give back a decent amount of energy when you're utilizing it over the course of a dungeon. And if you're going into purely huge AoE packs, you might think about taking this over maybe the Taste for Blood conduit, because Taste for Blood's amplifying Ferocious Bite by a percentage portion, and inside an AoE environment, you're not going to be pressing Ferocious Bite as often, especially if it's mass AoE, huge pulls. You're not going to be pressing Ferocious Bite because you're just going to actually re-hit your Primal Wrath because of the amount of damage it will do across everything. That might come in as a scenario. I don't think it's going to be the go-to right now, and I haven't found a build where that feels good either. But if you had that generating energy for you, it goes back to our previous statement of, hey, you might be able to use Blood Talon instead of Moment of Clarity because you're getting some of your energy from Incessant Hunger instead, or you might not need the Cat Eye Curio Legendary and go with Incessant Hunger so that you can use the Predator build. All the builds I've used with Incessant Hunger so far haven't felt that great because the chance is low and it's building up energy after you've already pressed abilities out, so you're kind of hoping for that chance to get it, versus Moment of Clarity and the Cat Eye Curio give you a base amount of energy to start with, and then you just start refunding it as it goes on. And yes, those are proc chances because Moment of Clarity is a proc chance, it's not guaranteed. Soul of the Forest is the only guaranteed energy resource you get, versus Predator every 30 seconds, and then but you can't always anticipate when something dies into your timing of your rotation because that doesn't always happen exactly when you want it to. It's more of once something dies, you get that reset, you utilize it. So the only one that we can actually fully use is the pure energy that we get from Moment of Clarity and Cat Eye Curio. And then the energy refunding that we get from Soul of the Forest will play into the energy we can count on 100%. So Incessant Hunger does exist. I don't think it's going to be strong enough for her to utilize, but it's definitely there. The other conduit that's on here that we can bring up is Sudden Ambush. Finishing moves have a 3% chance per combo point spent to make your next rake or shred deal damage as though they were from stealth. This is actually a cool conduit. Not that it's even remotely strong enough to consider right now, especially at base value. This will hopefully be something way down the line, not even this tier, I would say, once we actually get even higher ranks of it, where it starts becoming more of a 50% chance or so, because it's not going to do that right here on the first tier of gear that we have, but maybe down the line, once it's more of a 50% or more increased chance of doing it, we'll be able to utilize that damage more frequently on Shred and Rake, especially since we can no longer enhance these abilities with Blood Talons because of the way Blood Talons work now. It only works on finishers. We used to be able to enhance Rake with Blood Talons. We can't do that anymore, which takes less value away from Rake. And this would actually be kind of a cool thing because you track it and you'd be able to see, okay, do I want to use it on Rake? Do I need to use it on Rake? Can I Tiger's Fury, Sudden Ambush, snapshot my Rake? Or can I just use it on Shred for just some increased damage? Definitely an interesting one to look at and be on the lookout for the next tier maybe, whenever that actually gets up to that percentage point. I think right now it maxes at like 35% once you get it all the way capped out, which 35% in my opinion is just not enough because it only jumps off of your finishers, and you're doing a decent amount of finishers but not a massive amount of them, and only having that percentage chance per finisher is just not enough in my opinion. Okay, so that's going over the conduits, and those are the shared conduits. I still think that Carnivorous Instincts, which is the enhancement to Tiger's Fury, is going to be our main one, and then Taste for Blood is going to be the other one. And since we only get 2 potency conduits per soulbind now, those are pretty much going to be the 2 you lock in. So that goes over the conduits for us. Back over to our talents here. We went over the primary AoE one. However, I did mention in my previous video for my community answers, and I want to make sure I bring it up here too, is that Shadowlands Mythic dungeons have a very consistent theme with their bosses and with their layouts, and that is that they have multiple bosses that are back to back. Theater of Pain is the one I use in that example, and I'll use it again here. There's even a wing inside Theater of Pain where you go from mini boss to mini boss to mini boss to full boss, and then if that is the last wing that you had to do, then you go from that last boss all the way up to the very last boss of that dungeon. And so it's a lot of single target damage is what I'm getting at. Even if it's not just that wing, all the other wings is a small gauntlet, and then after that gauntlet, you hit a boss. And then you go through the next little gauntlet and you hit a boss. And most of the little ads inside those gauntlets all die extremely quickly, and then there's an abomination that is the bigger ad out of the group, and you can use your single target damage on that. And for that scenario, I think I would actually go with Sabertooth for priority damage on bosses and obviously those large ads, because Sabertooth is very, very strong with the Ferocious Bite, increasing it by 20% and increasing your rip damage by you not having to press rip after the first time you set it up, which is very big, especially if you're utilizing either the Venthyr Covenant or the Night Fae Covenant, because on that opener with Berserk and Ravenous Frenzy, you're going to be going into a shred, bite, shred, bite, shred, bite scenario, and every single time you bite, you're going to recap out rip at 32 seconds, and that means as soon as your entire burst phase is over, you're going to have a full rip that lasted throughout your entire burst phase, which is 20 seconds, throughout your entire burst phase, and then it's going to last 32 seconds after that as well, before you actually have to reapply it. But then that's 32 seconds just from being capped out at the end of it, and obviously you're going to hit Ferocious Bite again before that, so it's actually going to last even longer. So putting that one rip is probably going to last you 2+ minutes, and normally inside a Mythic Plus environment, bosses aren't living all that long, 3 minutes, 4 minutes maybe, tyrannical wise, and that'll keep it up for the majority of that fight, giving a massive amount of value to having that one rip increased by the Sabertooth. And Sabertooth does a huge amount of damage. The rest of the spec I would pretty much keep the same. Primal Wrath is still going to be the go-to on here. Inside this damage focusing one, I would say mainly for like a tyrannical Theater of Pain, that this would be more of a benefit on. And that's very specific scenario, I would say. Obviously, tyrannical is every other week. If you're going into Theater of Pain, maybe try the Sabertooth build out. It might not feel right to do it. However, Sabertooth along with Ravenous Frenzy or Convoke, because Convoke can cast 3 or more, depending on how you roll the dice, obviously, on your Convoke. But if it hits 3 different Ferocious Bites, then you're sitting there refreshing your rip continuously as well within 4 seconds of your Berserk, because I would have Berserk up as well when I press Convoke. And then at the end of your Convoke, you'll have 5 combo points, so you'll hit whatever random ferocious bites you get during Convoke, which typically for me it's around 3. It's like 2 to 3. And then right at the end of your Convoke, you have 5 combo points because it generates combo points every single time it does an ability as well. And then you hit another big ferocious bite at the end of it, giving you anywhere from 3 to 5 ferocious bites out of that burst window from those just the 4 seconds that you had, giving you that full duration on the rip as well. And each one of those bites within Convoke also get enhanced by Sabertooth, which then Sabertooth also gets enhanced by Soul of the Forest as well, giving you even more damage from that ability. So like I said, looking at all those synergies, we can definitely look at a damage profile for this hybrid. The main one's definitely going to be Predator, Wild Charge, Balance Affinity, Heart of the Wild, like once again, if you're Night Fae. If not, it's going to be Mighty Bash more than likely. And then Soul of the Forest, Primal Wrath, and Moment of Clarity till you have enough energy and you start overcapping on energy a lot. And then you'll go with Blood Talons. And that's going to be our AoE talent scenario. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the stats. And the stats that I've found great value with going into this expansion. And these are things that I would prioritize when you're going into Mythic Plus as well. Stats are important, right? So looking at it, crit is always a huge thing for us. You're going to want crit on as much gear as you can because of the fact that it will give you more combo points and more damage from the abilities you press, but you need to have a decent amount. Right now, I only have 27% because you don't get a massive amount of crit for all the crit stat that you actually obtain. It's not like our mastery. Then if you jump down our mastery, I have 40% without stacking it massively. I don't have like mastery trinkets and so on. I don't have any mastery enchants. Our mastery is actually very strong for us because it increases all of the damage done by your cap form bleed abilities and your finishing moves by 40%. So pretty much it's just not increasing swipe or shred for the most part. Everything else it pretty much increases because everything else is either a finisher or a bleed. And so that's only 2 abilities it's not increasing. It's increasing it by 40% right now. Haste is obviously going to be the lowest stat for us because of the energy build we just went over. It's not where we're getting our energy from, and the haste bracket we would have to hit, I think, for this to actually play would just take away so much of the other damage that we can get from mastery and from crit that it's going to be hard to say that haste is going to be the best. Granted, this might come out to Sims. However, I will tell you currently, the best damage I've done is definitely going more crit mastery. And then, like I said in my previous video, with the diminishing returns on secondary stats, moving up to 30%, and then you hit that first diminishing returns from 30 to 39%, and then after that you hit the second one, which is going to be 40% to 49%. Once I hit the 49% marker after gearing properly up, I will stop going after mastery and keep it around that 49-50% marker and go straight into versatility, because versatility increases and enhances all of our damage, but it does it at a much lower rate because we don't get as much versatility percentage per point of versatility we have. So even if you look at it right now, I have 40% mastery with only 424 mastery. If you look at my versatility, I have 361 and it's only 9%. 361 versus 424. There's not a massive difference between the amount I have there, and that shows you how much the difference is, and that's why mastery definitely comes ahead when it's either mastery or versatility because of the amount of damage you get from mastery and how much it acquire very quickly versus versatility. So get mastery. For me, I'm going to get mastery up to that 49%, 49-50% marker because that's going to be at the end of the second bracket entering the third diminishing return bracket. And then I'm going to be focusing on getting everything else into versatility. Meanwhile, all of the stuff I'm talking about will hopefully have crit on it. You know, we're going to want as much crit as we can. So it's going to be crit mastery, crit mastery, crit mastery. And then we're going to start swapping out gear that's going to be crit versatility while keeping your mastery the same. All right, that's kind of what I'm thinking this is all going to go for. Obviously, item level is going to rule this because your agility in the Shadowlands is probably going to be your highest stat overall just because there is no diminishing return on agility, and agility is still just baseline very strong for us. It's our main ability that increases the magnitude of our attacks and abilities. You're going to want it. All right, so that goes over the secondary stats and the way I've utilized it. Simming will come into play when Shadowlands launches, and you will still want to sim some of those, especially with the different brackets of diminishing returns for you. This is what I'm going in with my mindset on it off the get-go, and so far it's been playing very well for me inside the content I've been doing, but Sims will definitely show you exactly the potential of what you can do do, but you got to remember that sims aren't a perfect scenario every single time. Even the dungeon beta slice, which tries to give you that mythic plus damage profile settings, is not perfect, and a lot of them aren't going to account for you doing setups like using Heart of the Wild with Balance Affinity and Convoke to add additional boomy damage on top of your furlough damage in AoE. It's not going to really sim that correctly because you can't even imagine the type of scenario you're doing that in, and typically you're only going to be able to do that maybe 2-3 times in a dungeon if you link them all up together. Most of the time you can only do it about once because Heart of the Wild is on a 5-minute cooldown, and so it's a little bit harder to do. So when you're taking into account sims, stat weights are a great thing to look at when you're looking at sims, and it'll show you the values that you should be starting to go towards because you're getting diminishing returns from the values you have, and it'll just show you these ones are stronger. Start going after these ones for a little bit, and then check back in with us, redo your stat weights, see where it's at that point. So after that, now we got stat weights. While I have this gear open though, look at the enchantments that I have, okay? Inside Shadowlands, you're going to be able to add several enchantments, and one of the enchantments I'm actually even missing. So the first one that I placed on here is actually on the cloak, giving you 20 stamina and 30 leech. I like having a little bit extra healing. You can go with the full 30 stamina instead. I like having the stamina and leech. This next one that I put on the chest would be the go-to, in my opinion, called Eternal Skirmish. And Eternal Skirmish, what it does is permanently enchant your chest to increase your strength or agility by 20 and give your auto attacks have a chance to deal additional shadow damage. As a Furlough Druid, we hit every 0.9 seconds, especially with reduced haste. That's kind of where we're at, is 0.9 seconds. So we hit once every second for sure, and every single time we hit, we have the chance of doing additional shadow damage, which definitely plays into our damage profile a little bit, but it's something. It's free, pretty much, is what it is. It's free damage that you get from your chest enchant. So I would definitely go with the Eternal Skirmish. Then, as agility users, we're allowed to put plus 15 agility on our boots. Your hands and your wrist are optional. You don't need them. Those ones are just going to be utility. I have Gather on my hands, and I have the Hearthstone cooldown on my wrist, because those would be the other primary stat buffs for the other classes, where gloves are a strength enchant for strength users, and your bracers are intellect for casters. Going after that, on my weapon, you'll see I have Lightless Force. Lightless Force, what it does is it shoots out a shadow arc that will go and hit everything in front of you, and every single time it hits something, it does damage. So if we actually look at what Lightless Force says, it says permanently enchant your weapon to have a chance to send out a wave of shadow energy in front of you, striking the first 5 enemies when using your offensive spells and abilities. So it's going to hit 5 different targets and do shadow damage to all of them. You can put the agility amp onto your weapons as well with Celestial Guidance, which just randomly has a chance of proccing and gaining you 5% additional agility, which is never a bad thing. Primary stat is very big inside the Shadowlands. After that, your secondary stat that you're lacking on, which we are lacking on crit, is what I would recommend putting on your rings, and that's pretty much all of your enchants. So that's the gear, that's the stat weights. We went over the talents. Now let's start looking into utility for the Furlough Druid, because there's a lot of utility, and this is actually where the hidden value of Furlough Druids, this is where it lies. And a lot of people do not see it, because a lot of the stuff that we're capable of doing, most people will never track, and you'll never notice it until you start getting into higher keys, where stuff like that actually is even more valuable than just doing straight out damage numbers. So let's start off with the biggest utility that I think that we have, and it's actually something we kind of gained inside the Shadowlands. We've always had it, but it's definitely something we gained more ability with inside the Shadowlands, and that's actually regrowth, okay? I got a lot of people probably listening to this and be like, what are you talking about, Sage? We've always had regrowth, right? As a Furlough Druid, it's been part of our rotation for God knows how long at this point, right? It's the main reason why Blood Talons got reworked. Well, now with Blood Talons being reworked, it's not part of our rotation anymore, and it's not something you have to use a GCD on, but it's still something you get a free heal every 5 combo points. And that is massive inside dungeons. And the reason why it's even more so massive now is because you can use that heal whenever you want to, or whenever you think you need to. Okay, and it's a heal that you do not have to use on only yourself, and you can place it on any other target. And regrowth is a very decent sized heal, because regrowth does a 4018 heal and another 1062 over 12 seconds. The initial heal has a 40% increased chance for a critical effect if the target is already affected by regrowth. This is huge, and the reason why it's huge is because if you spam this on your tank, or you don't even have to spam it on your tank, if you throw it on your tank because your tank is taking damage, you're just helping them out. And you can spam this on everybody inside your group. On live, I use Voodoo as my raid frames for Mythic Plus, and because Voodoo allows me to have a lot of mouse over capabilities with it, as well as it allows me to attach all my weak auras to the sides of the unit frames, allowing me to see their cooldowns and what they have. But this also tracks the hot over those targets, allowing me to see who has a hot on them and who doesn't, and that allows me to place this on there. And the easiest way to do this is with the macro, right? Macros are great. Macros are great for everybody. And this is something I want to show to all of you guys. I'm not the best person at making macros. I'll give that to you guys hands down right now. However, this right here allows me to do exactly what I want to do inside dungeons, and you have to kind of get used to it a little bit because of the way it targets your previous target. And so it's just a mouse over macro tied with a target last target. And what it does is the moment that you're fighting and you get those 5 combo points, you utilize them, you get your primal swiftness, which allows you to get that free regrowth. Then I will just use my mouse. I'll mouse over the target frames, which are on my screen. They show up like right here, which I will show a video covering this as well. And all I have to do is press regrowth, and not only will it regrowth that target without me selecting that target, but then it'll target my previous target. So it'll select it, cast the instant regrowth, and then reselect my damaging target so that I can keep my rotation flowing without having to select the target, use the heal, and then reselect my previous target. This is massive in a group. For survivability, especially with healer mana inside dungeons, this allows you to just keep going. And regrowth is very, very strong. The innate resolve conduit that we have, regrowth and frenzy regeneration's healing is increased by 12% when it's on yourself, which gives you a massive amount of healing just on yourself passively, and this goes up to 28% at max rank, which is a massive amount of healing on yourself. So having just one of these rolling on yourself will almost keep you off the healer's radar, and then you can spam the regular regrowth on your other targets, and especially if you have just regrowth rolling on your tank and you press it again on the tank before that regrowth is over, because you'll definitely get another free cast regrowth before the regrowth on your target is over, before those 12 seconds are over, then you hit that tank, you have a chance of getting a 40% increased initial heal from regrowth on that tank, as well as the hots, and that's huge. When you're looking at the damage and the healing that comes from people inside of Mythic Plus, we talked about you need damage, you need survivability, and you need speed, okay? Feral Druid's very, very fast as class, so we got speed covered, right? But then you have the survivability aspect, and if you can enhance the survivability of the group throughout the entire time that you're inside that dungeon, that gives you more abilities, especially with it very, very minorly impacting your rotation and your damage output, because it's only 1 GCD to place that heal out, which is not a huge deal in the slightest inside a Mythic Plus scenario, especially if you can get those heals rolling out. And sometimes they've come in very clutch where they did save a tank's life, or they saved a healer's life because I was able to get a big regrowth out on them while still being in cap form and still doing damage, which is the big point I'm trying to get at. So I really hope everybody looks at this with more intent of what do classes bring. Not only can you bring out mass AoE, you can also bring a heal that you can continuously heal the group with, helping out the healer in the process. And there is more healing to come that we can absolutely do for the group. So next up, I wanted to talk about what you can do with Heart Wild and with Convoke. So Heart Wild, what it does is it enhances your previous affinity ability. This will definitely come into play in higher keys. Maybe your healer runs out of mana very, very fast. Whatever the case is, you can definitely help them out in scenarios, especially clutch scenarios where you know you're going to take a massive amount of damage, and you can go Resto Affinity. And if you go Resto Affinity, Heart of the Wild, and then you Convoke inside caster form, you will do a huge amount of AoE healing to the group, almost completely neglecting an ability. And this will definitely come into play. If anybody watched the Keystone Masters that just went on, you will notice that that first boss inside Sanguine Depths is a monster when you get to higher key levels, and it's because when he pops out those orbs, anytime you hit that orb, it does a whole bunch of splash damage to everybody, which is a big AoE. And if you have a Feral Druid, or you have a Druid in general, really, you can utilize this setup to get more heals pumped out, because we saw how much that first boss is worth to get past. Otherwise, it kills the run or kills the timer. And this right here could have helped survive that burst phase. Go defensive for it. When we know that those things are going to be in there, let's do it, okay? The heal will heal everybody up through the first orb. The next 2 orbs that you're going to take, you're going to pop Heart of the Wild and then pop Convoke and start throwing out some massive heals on everybody. and it's only 4 seconds of downtime from being on the boss that you would utilize this ability. Yes, the very first thing everybody's going to be thinking of is, no, I don't want to use my Convoke on a healing spell. But when it comes to Mythic Plus, especially higher end Mythic Plus, once again, damage is definitely needed. There are damage checks, but survivability comes first. All right, if your health never reaches 0, as the boss's health does go to reach 0, you're winning. That's all that matters, is the fact that you have the capability of doing that. And if an ability like this, where you can kind of pseudo off-heal, do that kind of a support class while the healer is there as well, definitely can play into a Mythic Plus setting, allowing you additional healing for the group to keep everybody up. And that's a big way to play. You know, it does take a little bit of skill to realize that you can do that. It is a little bit more things to track, even though Feral Druids are already tracking combo points, energy, snapshots, and all of your bleeds on a target, which is not nearly as much as we used to do in the past, because snapshotting is very minor now, especially with the build we're talking about now. The only snapshotting you're really doing is with Tiger's Fury. But there's still a lot to track, and you have to be in the groove to do it. You have to know that you can use your instant cast regrowths on targets to help save their lives, as well as get just passive healing going. Or you can go with this Resto Affinity and not only get big healing out, but if you instacast Regrowth and the tank is still going down, you can Swift Mend, which will take you out of cap form, but since you already have a instacast Regrowth on him, then you can get a huge Swift Mend. With the Restoration Affinity and Heart of the Wild, it casts Swift Mend a ton. The last time that I did this, it cast Swift Mend 4 different times, each one being above 20,000 as a heal. One of them got up to like 28.4 thousand healing as well, and that's huge, because that's not just talking about all of the other 12 spells that it did to friendly targets. That's talking about just the 4 spells that it did, which almost could have full healed 4 different people in the group. And that's pretty huge. You know, when you look at it from a survivability perspective, once again, this will be more of a healer build. Ysera's Gift is a decent heal, and it does heal the group as well. It's a lot less because it's only 3% of your maximum health every 5 seconds. But having Restoration Affinity, Heart of the Wild, and Convoke is a big burst. And then even if you're just Heart of the Wild and Resto Affinity, if your healer dies and you don't have any more battle reses, that makes you a healer for those 45 seconds pretty much, where most tanks will be able to sustain a decent amount of damage while you're sitting there pumping out heals as a pseudo replacement healer for that time frame. So there definitely can be some clutch plays with it. Obviously, you're not going to select talents for clutch plays really, but you can definitely select this for more throughput on the healing aspect to gain not only damage that you have, but as well as gain the healing that you have on top of it for that survivability. So there is a lot to be said for the Feral Druid being able to fully utilize its hybrid nature to heal as it's doing damage. And it's one of the few classes in the game that can really do that efficiently and enough to actually make it somewhat matter inside of a dungeon. Even if you look at Boomkin, who can use Regrowth while in Boomkin, they're using a full cast time one, and us, we're just throwing it out as a heal. It's not taking us nearly as much time. It's taking 1 GCD. That's an instant cast GCD. And we're just throwing out heals left and right. And most people won't see this happen because it does take this discipline like we talked about in order to make that happen. But it's definitely a way to increase the utility of Feral Druids. And it's something a lot of people don't notice or track, because a lot of times when you see a DPS on the healing meter, it's because you think that they're healing themselves. So like if you see a Demon Hunter on there, that's obviously their leech healing them back, or their orbs healing them back from their soul fragments. And it's not really something that they're healing the group with, which, you know, is still good self-healing for them, but it's not helping the group. Whereas Feral Druids can and should utilize their abilities to heal the group and get spread healing across everybody so that you can periodically just get that utility. So that's only talking about the very first one, the very first utility ability that Feral Druids have. And I know I went on about it, but that one's very specific. Once again, just to show you guys that that macro, I'll make sure to have it posted up on the video nice and big so you guys can see the full macro if you want to copy it. But this is huge, and it allows you to do it. I'll also show video footage of me utilizing this ability on players so that I can get additional healing for them. So next up is the one that we actually have baseline, which is Stampeding Roar. Increases all friendly players within 15 yards by 60% for 8 seconds. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, so you can use this very repeatedly inside dungeons to enhance the entire group's speed across something. You can use it right before you go into a stealth as well, which will increase everybody's speed while in stealth or in Vispot. That way they can get through whatever you're skipping that much faster as well. So there is value to having Stampeding Roar. It's not specific to just Feral Druids and Guardian Druids anymore. Inside Shadowlands, all Druids will have it now. All Specs of Druids, Resto and Boomy have it now too. So it is utility that we're sharing. And that's fine. It's still something we're bringing to the table. There is a conduit, a finesse conduit, that you can select as well to further enhance it, and that's called Front of the Pack. Stampeding Roar's radius and duration are increased by 15%. So you can have a little bit more speed in there and a little bit more radius. The radius not really all that big in a Mythic Plus setting because you should be around your group anyway, but the duration is. It gives you even more speed inside a dungeon that you can just continuously spam every 2 minutes. And in most dungeons, you will be able to get this off fairly often, especially like every other pack, you'll be able to get Stampeding Roar off. And that's pretty much what Stampeding Roar has to offer. The other one is obviously, as a Druid, we bring Rebirth, which is a battle res that we can utilize. And for Feral Druids, it's a little bit worse just because of the fact that we do have to go out of cap form to cast it, but it is an ability that we bring to the table. There is a conduit that enhances this called Born Anew, which is Rebirth grants the target 50% movement speed for 8 seconds, and Well Fed increasing their primary stats by 20 for 1 hour. So it's going to get them back up. It's going to give them 50% movement speed, well-fed buff, and obviously they're back to life. So that's great. I definitely think that that's very strong for us to have. However, engineering battle res is still a thing. They brought it back, as well as there's 3 different classes that can bring it. Warlock, Druid, and Death Knight can bring this, and all the specs of all 3 of those classes can bring it as well. So this might not be the most essential aspect to bringing a Druid, specifically a Feral Druid, into a comp, but it's something that we definitely bring to the table to help utilize. The other utility that we have, the next one, is probably the most used one that people don't realize how much value this one does have, and that's called Soothe, which you soothe the target, dispelling all enrage effects. And that's very huge, especially with Raging, which is a Mythic Plus affix. This is probably the affix that Druids are most known for counteracting, because we can de-enrage targets, and we can do it every 10 seconds. This comes even further into play inside Shadowlands because there are some very good uses of this inside these dungeons. Halls of Atonement, we talked about those bear hounds that are inside those dungeons, and they get huge and enrage, and they will definitely hurt a tank, and if a tank sits there and takes it all, they could definitely die. And you have the ability to immediately stop them from enraging and go back down to their regular form. You can only do one every 10 seconds, but it allows you to take all of that damage immediately off the board, as well as if Raging is one of the affixes you have to counter combat, then you can start taking that off of all the targets as well, giving this a massive amount of value to not only those dungeons that have that affix, but also several dungeons have that amplifier effect. In Sanguine Depths, there's actually mobs that get enraged that gives it increased health, and if you use this on them, they instantly die because it takes away their rage effect that gave them the extra health, which instantly kills them. And those are the little draggers that are over in Sanguine Depths, which is great. Further enhancement to our utility is always a great thing, and this is an ability we can spam all the time. Another huge ability we have as Feral Druid is Remove Corruption, which has an 8-second cooldown, which is, once again, another ability that isn't noticed as often, and there are a ton of curses inside the Shadowlands, inside the dungeons. Curses and poisons. So nullifies a corrupting effect on the friendly target, removing all curses and poison effects. And it's saying removing all of them. It takes all of whatever you have on you off. And that's huge because you can utilize this on the party and you can utilize it on yourself. And there's, once again, several dungeons that have those 2 effects inside it. Plaguefall has them, Halls of Atonement has them, Sanguine Depths has them, and this allows you to immediately remove any of those issues. Mistral Sai has it actually too. So once again, a lot of these dungeons have abilities that you can use Remove Corruption on, and you can use this on all members inside the group as well. So you can dispel them all, you can de-enrage them all, you can heal them, you can battle res them, and then if we come down here, we also have Cyclone, pretty much takes the target completely out of play for 6 seconds, and this might actually come in handy if you're talking about bolstering. You can stop stuff from bolstering if you actually use this ability on them. They won't get the bolstering stacks from it as long as you do it before they start acquiring those bolstering stacks, which is huge. If you have a priority target that is not immune to Cyclone, so it's not immune to CCs, then targets, you have a whole bunch of little targets around it that are going to start dying, you can Cyclone it so that it only is going to be immune for 6 seconds, and during those 6 seconds you can burst down everything that's around it, making them not be able to bolster any further, which is huge inside of bolstering. So now we have another affix that we can actually do clutch plays on with using Cyclone during that as well. The next one up is going to be Hibernate. And Hibernate, even though it sounds like it's an ability that rarely ever got used, there is still potential for this ability inside Shadowlands as well. And most people will actually know about this ability in Mythic Plus when it came to Underrot. Because Underrot, when you're going towards the second boss inside the room where all the ads are circled around Kragmaw, all of the Blood Swarmers and all of the maggots, you were able to actually continuously cast Hibernate on them, which interrupted their abilities and put them to sleep. And if you just kept spamming it on it, it would completely take those mobs out of commission entirely, allowing you to not only have full interrupts over those mobs, but allow them to stop doing damage to their targets. And the Blood Swarmers are the ones that fixated on targets, so you actually wanted to spam that to keep the other targets alive if you didn't have something to immediately stun them or just to burst them down. And then the maggots do that big spray, and you were able to hibernate them, so that came in big too. Inside Halls of Atonement, we've talked about this several times, those dogs that we've talked about that are a huge pain because they get enraged, you can de-enrage one of them and you can put the other one to sleep. Obviously, if somebody hits it, it's going to wake back up, but if a tank is kiting to try to get away from it, you have the capability of putting it to sleep, pausing it for that time, and allowing your tank to get away, which is once again another big utility factor that we have that we can definitely use. The other ability that we have that's going to mainly be the one that we take, because you can't have 3 different utility abilities. You can have Your Soul's Vortex if you go Resto, you have Incapacitating Roar from Guardian, and then you can have Typhoon from Balance Affinity. And Typhoon is a great ability for, once again, allowing the tank to kite, pushing mobs away from him so that he can reset necrotic stacks, because it pushes them away and it dazes them for 6 seconds, so it'll slow them for 6 seconds, and that's great. It also can work as a mass interrupt for casters, so that you can push them away and stop them from casting whatever they're doing. Or if there's an AoE ground effect that someone's about to slam on the ground and everybody's right there in it, you can use Typhoon and push that away, and then they'll stop it. Sometimes they do start recasting it immediately after you push them, but then it'll get whoever's in range out of range, they'll survive that mechanic or ability. So Typhoon is probably going to be the main one we always have, just because of the fact that we're going to have Balance Affinity the majority of the time. Incapacitating Roar is probably the weaker out of all 3 of these in my opinion. Incapacitating Roar is great for like an AoE interrupt, just like Typhoon was, and it will keep the targets exactly where they were. But Incapacitating Roar, the incapacitation from it only lasts if the target doesn't get hit. So the moment that target hits again, it's gone. But it will interrupt all the targets in an AoE function. This is something I massively used, obviously, as a Guardian Druid. It's definitely a utility I use in that function so that I can just get an AoE interrupt off. And it works very well for that niche situation. However, out of the other 2, Typhoon and Ursol's Vortex, I would go with one of those 2 for sure. This one will, obviously, if you're going to High Mythic Plus and you need that damage reduction as well as that additional heal for yourself with Frenzy Regeneration, Incapacitating Roar will still add benefit to you as a Feral Druid inside that dungeon. Past that, Feral Druids do have a regular res as well. All hybrid classes do have that as well, but it is a utility factor that you can bring in, and it's because sometimes there's death skips that people can't handle, and they can all go and die, and then you can go and res them. Because stealth is a huge player inside these dungeons, especially inside this season where Prideful is a thing, because you want to make sure you spawn Prideful at the proper opportune times, mainly before bosses. That way you have that increased damage of 30% going into a boss fight, and being able to stealth inside a dungeon is huge. And we have our Prowl, which also has an increased stealth form while we're in camp form, because we're Feral Druids, where things just won't see us inside stealth form as much as it will see others. So instead of having to use an invis pot, we can just stealth there, as well as, once again, if there's a skip that everybody already used their invis pot and we still want to get past it, you can stealth past everything, they can run up there, you can res them up and get the group past the mob if you need to. Obviously, this isn't nearly as strong as a Rogue's Shroud, and Rogues will be very good inside this first season because of their Shroud, because you do want to optimize where you get those prides. Or you could just be a group that has full version of stealth, which we saw this on the Keystone Masters as well, where you have a hunter that uses camouflage, a druid, all the druids that use their prowl, you have a mage that uses invis, and they can all get past the targets and not have to use a shroud at all. That comes into play as well. So being able to use prowl is a huge benefit in our wheelhouse as well. The other thing bringing a melee, because this is a melee benefit, is that we have a 15-second interrupt, and that is Skull Bash. And having interrupts and consistently using your interrupt is obviously a great gain because it avoids damage, and if you're a Night Fae and you take Naya and you take her tools for poison, it'll actually give you increased damage every time you interrupt the target as well, because it'll put a 30-second poison dot on them, and then every time you interrupt after that, it'll actually do increased damage as well. It'll just do a flat amount of damage. So now that we've gone over all of the different utilities we got healing that you can do to the entire group with your instant cast regrowth. You got some big AoE healing that you can opt into with Heart of the Wild and Convoke, or Heart of the Wild, Resto Affinity, and Convoke. And then we also have Stampeding Roar. Every 2 minutes, give them a speed boost. We do have a De-Enrage that comes into play very clutch in a lot of situations. We have a Remove Corruption ability that removes corruption and poisons. We have Cyclone, which has a massive amount of value in several dungeons with Inspiring or Bursting. You can hibernate mobs. You can Typhoon them, slow them, and daze them. You can go into Resto Affinity for your Soul's Vortex to even snap targets to one location. You are a stealth user. You do have a battle res. On top of all of those, we do have some pretty big defensive abilities. Being able to use Barkskin in this expansion every 1 minute, having 20% DR is pretty big for survivability. And then still having our survival instincts giving us that 50% damage reduction for 6 seconds is also pretty huge when surviving. That one is on a 3-minute cooldown though. So we do bring defensive value. We do bring pseudo healing and off healing value to the group, as well as battle reses and so on. So there is value in the utility of Feral Druids. We do not bring a passive buff to the group. However, in Mythic Plus, the passive buffs are even less because now they're 3% buffs. And even with 3% over the 3 damage dealers that are utilizing the buff, if all of 3 of them actually do that damage type, so all 3 of them would have to be magic dealers if a Demon Hunter's buff, or physical damage dealers for the Monk buff, or attack power users for the warrior buff, so on and so forth. Those are all minor buffs now inside a Mythic Plus environment, so they don't mean nearly as much as they previously did. And Feral Druids not having that isn't going to hurt us as much inside the Mythic Plus scene as it does inside the raid scene. So not having one of those is going to play that much against us. However, it will take people time to notice the capabilities, our healing capabilities, as well as our uncapped AoE abilities inside dungeons. The last thing I want to bring up in this section of the video is how to synergize while playing with a Feral Druid, and especially playing with the Feral Druid utilizing Predator. So Predator as an ability allows us to get that energy on death resets, right? So tanks that know this and want to keep the uptime of damage and energy utilization over a fight will actually periodically pull in some of the lesser adds that they can into a boss fight to amplify a Feral Druid's damage, because all we have to do is get one bleed off on that target in order for them to give us that continual damage amp as well as the energy regeneration. So a group that's optimizing for the players inside their group, and if obviously if there's a Feral Druid in there, the tank, if he pulls in those periodic adds into boss fights, it allows you to continuously have that energy flowing, as well as the damage enhancement that you get from Tiger's Fury, which is further enhanced by Carnivorous Instincts, which is the conduit. So I just wanted to make sure I tag that in here too, because a lot of pulls and a lot of dungeon success do revolve around pulling towards what your group brings. So for Fire Mages, it's pulling around the combustion ability. For Demon Hunters, pulling around when they have that huge Metamorphosis cooldown. Things like that are things that you should be pulling around to. Tiger's Fury is not nearly as huge as those are, but just pulling in 1 or 2 little adds every so often to get those resets in will play huge when you're playing with a Feral Druid. So if you do have a Feral Druid in your group, or you have somebody that wants to play one and you're a tank, keep that in mind if you're listening to this video. Alright, next up, let's talk about some of the other legendaries, because Eye Curio, yes, it is a great legendary, especially at the start here. Will it be the best legendary towards the end of the expansion, or even towards the end of this tier? And there's a chance that it might not be, once again, if you start getting to the crit brackets where your crit starts giving you enough combo points where you don't need as much energy. You might not want to opt in for the Eye Curio and instead go with Apex Predator. Apex Predator carving, what it does is your rip damage has a 4% chance to make your next ferocious bite free and deal the maximum damage. So making sure that it deals its damage at 5 combo points and 50 energy, which gives it a chance to increase the damage by up to 100%. Now, with Apex Predator's carvings, obviously Primal Wrath is going to be the big player for this one, and if you have Primal Wrath ticking on mobs, on several mobs, then there is a good chance that you will get this reset and you'll be able to spam out free Ferocious Bites while you're doing your AoE, which is huge, because not only will you get the free Ferocious Bite within it that's already enhanced by Soul of the Forest, because your free Ferocious Bites do get enhanced by Soul of the Forest, but they'll also refund energy through Soul of the Forest, because Soul of the Forest will give you 5 energy per combo point spent on an ability, and since this proc ability does act as though it does have 5 combo points, it does give you that energy back on top of giving you that 5% increased damage from it. If you're taking Sabretooth inside it, it would enhance it even further, and those procs would get that 20% as well. Inside a dungeon, you're probably not going to take Sabretooth for the majority of scenarios, unless it's like the ones we previously discussed. You'll go with Soul of the Forest and Predator, which will just give you those huge Ferocious Bites that are instant cast that you didn't have to do anything to build up towards, allowing you to spend more time getting your bleeds and your Primal Wrath continuous on everything and spinning out those Ferocious Bites. And a lot of times what happened is the moment that I got those 5 combo points, waiting for the 50 energy to hit Ferocious Bite, I would actually get it to proc, and then I'd be able to hit it, and then it would actually refund energy back to me because of Soul of the Forest, and then I'd be able to hit it again to actually utilize the 5 combo points I just made, allowing me to do back-to-back full optimized Ferocious Bites, which is huge and does play into the spec very well. However, it is a 4% chance, and sometimes you don't get as many procs as you want, especially if you have a burst group that can burst down mobs very, very fast. This isn't going to be as strong in that kind of comp. So once again, synergizing with your group. If your group has really big AoE damage, then this might not be the go-to, because you won't be able to get enough ticks off your rips to actually give you the 4% chance multiple times in order to do it. And it's not a multiplier effect. So if you have multiple mobs, it's not going to actually add more than 4%. It's just a 4% chance for every single tick across every single mob that has rip on it. It doesn't increase over how many people you actually have it on. If it did, you definitely get this to proc more often. It'd probably be a little too strong, but it definitely proc way more than it does with this ability. So Apex Predator carvings is another one of those things that you can trade out for if you don't need the energy or the resources to give you more damage inside of a dungeon. And I definitely like playing with it. It definitely feels good to have that track. You get a big light up over your Ferocious Bite, and then you can spam it, and it gives you energy back, does a big amount of damage while you're doing your AoE, and it's very nice welcome pace to it. So I do enjoy this legendary. I do think Eye Curio is far superior to it right now, and then we might play with Apex Predator's carving later on. The other legendary I wanted to mention is Eye of Fearful Symmetry. Does have some decent synergy inside it, and it does actually help counteract the lack of crit that we have, because what it does is Tiger's Fury causes your next 2 finishing moves to restore 2 combo points. So every single time you press Tiger's Fury, the next 2 finishers, you'll get 2 combo points, and combo point generation is always huge, because now you'll automatically have 2 every single time you go into building to those 5 combo points after that, which makes it less important to have that much more crit, because no matter what, it'll only take you 3 GCDs at most to get to your next 5 combo point finisher, and more than likely it'll only take you 2, because you'll get one of the 2 of those, good chance that they'll crit, and then it'll take 2 GCDs to get a full 5 combo point finisher in there. And if you have targets that are periodically dying, then this will be great for it. I don't think it's nearly as strong as the Eye Curio, just giving you that energy that you can utilize, because Eye of Fearful Symmetry is counteracting your lack of crit, but it's not increasing your energy pool where you can stop overcapping from Predator resets. It's just allowing your Predator resets to be far more valuable to you, because it's refunding combo points back to you now. So it's a great legendary. It definitely feels good as well, but I don't think it's going to be as great as Eye Curio as far as resource generation. And then Apex Predator's carving is purely just a damage proc. It's something that just gives you more throughput on a proc base, versus the other 2 are giving you more resources that aren't really proc based. Those ones are more accurate to the damage that you're doing. Those are mainly the only ones that I would go for going into the Mythic Plus scene at the beginning of Shadowlands. Circle of Life and Death does synergize very well with Primal Wrath, because it makes all of Primal Wrath's damage do it faster, 25% faster, or in 25% less time is actually what the tooltip says, but that's what it does. It makes all of your damage from Primal Wrath happen that much faster, and since it's only 12 seconds, it will bring it down to about 8 seconds, and that's pretty big, because most targets will live for about 8 seconds, making you obtain the full value of your Primal Wrath And I definitely see a future where once we're able to wear 2 legendaries, having this and then Apex Predator's Carving will be massive for us, because it'll allow those ticks to go off that much faster, allowing us to get even more resets of Ferocious Bites. But obviously that's talking way in the future, but there is definitely some extremely good synergies that we can have if we're able to pair up multiple legendaries here for different scenarios, and I'm looking forward to that above all else for our future in Shadowlands. Alright, so that's been a very long discussion over the damage profile that we have, going over legendary stats, going over our utility and synergy within a group. And I think it's very worthwhile because this is a deep dive video for Mythic Plus, and I want to make sure everybody understands what I'm trying to get across for it. And if there's anything that I missed during those synergies and that discussion, please let me know. Alright, for the next one, we're going to do some application here. Alright, how to get your bleeds up very quickly on a multi-target situation. So going in here, you do not have to preemptively put regrowth on yourself anymore. You can do it if you want to. It's not necessary, especially if you don't have the time, because it's not going to give you blood talons anymore. And I know a lot of people are still getting in the habit of not having to do that, because that's been our gameplay for the last several years. You don't have to do that anymore, so you just go immediately into Prowl. Alright, and as soon as you go to Prowl, you're going to jump in here and you're going to hit Rake. And the reason why you're going to hit Rake, because it gets that 60 increased damage from being in stealth form, and it can also stun the target, which is definitely great inside a Mythic Plus environment, because not only will it immediately stun a caster target and stop them from casting for the first 4 seconds of combat, but it can also prevent all that damage as well. So it's an additional stun ability that a lot of people don't take into account, and it is something that we can do. So jumping in here, in order to get all your bleeds up, you're going to stealth, you're going to rake the first target, then you're going to thrash. And the reason why you're going to use this weak thrash ability, AoE, is because your bleeds do more damage over time, right? So you want to make sure you're getting all of these up immediately. And also, if you get a crit with Rake, your very first opener ability, and then you get a crit with Thrash, that's going to give you 4 combo points, meaning that your next ability will guarantee you 5 combo points and allow you to use your finisher, which is going to be your Primal Wrath on the first one to get your bleeds up. However, your next ability, if you do crit on those 2 first abilities, so if you go in there with Rake and you get 2 combo points, and then you Thrash and you get 2 combo points, what you're actually going to want to do to optimize that last 1 combo point is not swipe. You're actually going to want to tab target, or target however you target. I am going to use tab target. So you can tab target and then use your Rake, because that 1 combo point utilized on a Rake instead of a Thrash at the beginning opener right there will actually pay more damage to you, because that tick will get its full duration off. So in here on this 3 target situation we have with dummies, as long as it doesn't phase me, I used to have an issue with phasing with a quest over here, we're going to run in here and then Tiger's Fury, Thrash, and then Primal Wrath everything. And look at that. So I have 2 targets that have all of the bleeds on them, and 1 target that has 2 bleeds on them that doesn't have a rip, or doesn't have a Rake on it. And that was very quick for setup. After that, once you have your Rip, your Thrash, and your Primal Wrath on targets, the next thing to do is to swipe to get up to 5 combo points. And generally, you'll have time to swipe up to 5 combo points, use Ferocious Bite, and then swipe to 5 combo points, as well as reapplying a Thrash in between there, and then being able to Primal Wrath, and then you probably put Rake on a target, whichever target has the most health, because you want to make sure that your bleeds are getting their full durations out. So you're going in there, Tiger's Fury, Rake, Thrash, swap targets, we'll swipe, see we didn't get any of those to crit at all, and then you have that up there, and then you can keep swiping, and then get priority damage, and then refresh. There's Rip. And then we can bite. One of the other things you want to take into consideration when you're doing this, especially when you're about to hit that Ferocious Bite, is that once again, you have to keep in the back of your mind always that your Ferocious Bite does more damage the more bleeds you have on a target. So when you are switching targets around in an AoE environment, you want to make sure that before you hit that Ferocious Bite, you are on a target that has your 3 bleeds active on it. So that's going to be your first target mainly that you put your Rake on. That's going to have all 3 bleeds off the majority of the time. You can spam your Rake across targets, and as long as your targets do survive for their full duration, it is worthwhile putting Rake on multiple targets, but have to survive for that full duration, because then you'll get it on multiple targets. They'll do its multiplied damage across all those targets, which enhances the value of that bleed, and then you'll be able to swipe while all your bleeds are up. The scenario I did right here is more than likely what I believe is the best one. Go in there with the Prowl Rake, hit Thrash, so you start getting that bleed damage and that modifier bleed in there, and then tab target so you can put your rake on there because that first bleeds are going to last their full durations because rake only lasts for 12 seconds. And so that's definitely worthwhile putting it on there, and mobs will typically last for about 12 seconds or more depending on their health pool inside a pole. And this very quickly becomes a priority system. Your bleeds, you have to remember, are not your main source of damage once targets start to die. So in the scenario, if we didn't have one of these targets, so only a 2-target situation, and the targets were 50% or lower, the value of applying Primal Wrath to them there isn't a value to it anymore, because the 5 combo points you would have spent on that Primal Wrath will be far better spent on a Ferocious Bite at that, and just don't reapply the rip. Same thing with Rake. If a target's about to die and you're not going to get the value damage from applying Rake on that target, there is no reason to apply Rake on that target. Now, you do want to make sure you have some form of bleed out of them on the targets, mainly for your Predator reset. However, that can be a Thrash that you place across AoE, and most of the times you have at least one of your AoE bleeds already ticking on them while the other ones are ticking off, and as long as you have a bleed on them, you'll get the reset from Tiger's Fury and you don't have to worry about it. However, you have to make sure you prioritize the damage of not utilizing a bleed when things are dying, because bleeds only have value if they last their duration, or the majority of their duration. So I want to make sure everybody understands that fully, because that is a big portion of Fertile Druid damage. The other thing is, with Primal Wrath on multi-target situation, it is actually a good idea to use Primal Wrath to override a previous Primal Wrath, as long as you're still within your Tiger's Fury windows for snapshotting it. And that allows you to do that instant damage coming from Primal Wrath continuously. So there is a value to actually overriding an already placed Primal Wrath, depending on how many targets you have. And especially in Shadowlands, there's a lot of mobs that will either accumulate more mobs, or they'll be jumping around, and you might not hit all of them with your Primal Wrath, and this will do even more damage, because Primal Wrath itself does a decent amount of initial damage to targets, and since it's a finisher, it also gets enhanced by that Soul of the Forest, and it further gets enhanced by Tiger's Fury as well. It'll also get enhanced by Blood Talons if you're taking Blood Talons, which just gives even more damage to utilizing this. But if you have Blood Talons on it, you're not going to actually want to spam this ability, like I said, because you're going to waste your Blood Talon procs on it. So you'd actually not use that in that sense, in that scenario with Blood Talons on it. However, in this current build, I do not have Blood Talons, and at mass AoE packs, you are going to utilize this ability more than you are going to use those 5 combo points on Ferocious Bite, because you're not only getting that initial damage, but you're getting the collective bleed damage from it as well the moment it starts ticking. And then once things start dying and it's not worthwhile putting your bleeds up, that's when you start shifting over hard to Ferocious Bite, as your regular rotation is weaving in Ferocious Bites in your damage rotation. Okay, so the last thing I want to go over for the damage profile of Fertile Druids is kind of the opener. And right now I'm on a Night Fae Fertile Druid, and I want to show you guys the opener I do for the Fertile Druid in this given scenario. I am using the Skulker Predator trinket, so I will be pressing that. You don't have to utilize that trinket. I do think it's going to be one of the better trinkets for Fertile Druids, because we can amplify it with Tiger's Fury. But pretty much what I'm going to go in here on a boss fight is I'm going to jump in there with Prowl and Tiger's Fury active, as well as soon as I get that rake, that very first rake for the increased damage, I'm going to hit the Skulking Predator trinket, because Tiger's Fury will be active, and that's going to pounce on the target while I'm generating 5 combo points for that first rip. So you're going to go in there, you're going to rake, press that trinket, thrash, because once again you want to get your bleeds on the target as soon as you can, and that is an amplifier bleed, so it's going to help you with your damage later on. So you're going to Prowl, rake, trinket, thrash, and then you're going to shred to 5 combo points. Then you're going to rip. As soon as you rip, you want to convoke. Okay, and the reason why you actually want to convoke in this scenario with this burst damage is because Naya here, her Grove Invigoration, gives you 400 mastery, because it gives you 16 stacks times 25 mastery for each stack, and that gives you 400 mastery. And you want that mastery bonus because it lasts for 30 seconds, and it will increase all of the damage of each Ferocious Bite spam you do within that Berserk window for those 30 seconds. And that's going to play huge into that opener. All right, so let's get into it. Let's see if I don't mess this up. So jumping in here, we're going to go Prowl, And then we're going to hit both of these abilities because neither one of them are on GCD as we're going inside the target. And you can absolutely macro these if you want to. I don't macro these together unless it's a Ravenous Frenzy build because I like having them separate. But going in here, thrash it. There we go. Convoke. Even though it had 2 combo points already, that's fine. It gives us that additional damage. We're going to bite. We didn't get a crit on that one, but we're going to keep it rolling. Didn't get a crit on that one either because crits would have given us 3 combo points, and that's why crit's going to play huge into it. But look, because of the energy build I have, I barely had to wait for the energy on that one, and we're doing fine damage. All right, not obviously the most optimal damage for any given scenario. Right here, we're going to wait for Tiger's Fury to reapply the Rake and the Rip and the Thrash. And then look at that, we're back at 50, and it didn't go off for some reason. But you guys get the idea. So going in there, you can do a decent amount of burst, especially if you can get it all flowing correctly for you there. I did miss 2 abilities inside that rotation, but it is very strong. And then after your initial burst window is over and Berserk is over with, you're going to do your same priorities. Keep up your bleeds while generating enough combo points to hit Ferocious Bites in between. You want to make sure you're pulling up to 50 energy before you hit Ferocious Bites in order to get that increased amount of damage you have on the targets. Your burst can go very high, but then you're going to average out, and as long as you keep the consistent damage going, you will have decent damage with inside the group. Alright, so jumping over here to my Venthyr Feral Druid, I wanted to show the burst rotation with Ravenous Frenzy. Ravenous Frenzy I have shown before with the macro that I'm utilizing for it. It's just a show tooltip for Ravenous Frenzy. Then you have cast Ravenous Frenzy, cast Berserk, cast Tiger's Fury, Potion of Phantom Fire, which is a single target potion, and then casting Rake, which actually uses a GCD. So you compile all of your non-GCD abilities together so that you can start spamming very quickly. Ravenous Frenzy gives you that damage modifier and a small haste modifier. As you continuously do damage per stack, it stacks up for the 20 seconds, but you do not want to be idle, so you're not going to be waiting very long for the energy pool at all. So when we actually go in here for the talents, I'm going to switch this over to Moment of Clarity because you want that big damage. Now we're going to stick with this AoE setup because this is what you're going to have inside a Mythic Plus dungeon. Obviously for that bigger burst, you'd go with Sabertooth and Brutal Slash, and probably Blood Talons. But here we want as much energy as we can because you want to be able to use as many Ferocious Bites above 50 energy in order to get that enhanced damage to Ferocious Bite. So going into it, we're going to Stealth Prowl. Ravenous Frenzy actually does take you out of Stealth. However, since we're going to be using it as our first ability from Stealth as our macro, and it does apply Rake, it should still give Rake that increased 60% damage from Stealth. If it doesn't, we're popping Berserk at the same time anyway, so Berserk will actually just give it its 60%. So you technically don't need to be in Prowl at the start of a fight when using Ravenous Frenzy tied in with Berserk, or when using Berserk at all ever, because it'll just give it that damage. In order to get the stun, you will have to be Stealth though. Alright, so we're going to go in there doing the same thing we did inside the Night Fae one as well. We're going to Prowl. We're going to use our macro in this scenario, however, with the Ravenous Frenzy, which is going to pop Ravenous Frenzy, Tiger's Fury, Berserk, the potion, as well as pop Rake. Our potion's on cooldown right now, so I'm not going to proc that. As we go in there, that's going to hit our first ability. We're going to Trinket for the Pounce as well, and then after that, we're going to get into the rotation of using Thrash and then Shred to 5 combo points, get that first rip in there, and then hopefully we'll get the crit percentages that we want to be able to shred, bite, shred, bite, shred, bite. However, our crit percentage is not very high currently. It's going to take more time for that to be more fluid later on. So jumping in here, we're going to go ahead and waiting for a second to pull. Can't wait too long though, so getting those regrowths in there to actually kind of stall us. And that's the Ravenous Frenzy build as well. I personally like the way the Convoke one feels more. Ravenous Frenzy might come ahead in damage. However, I've said this in previous videos as well, and I don't think that the damage amplifier from Ravenous Frenzy is as strong as people feel it is, because it's only giving you that 2% damage stacking up over time. So at the very, very end of the 20 seconds, you might hit that 19 to 20 stacks, and obviously that's giving you 40% increased damage on that very last ability, but it's ramping up damage. So the very first ability you do, it's not giving you increased amping damage because you don't have any stacks. After that first one, it gives you 2, then 4, then 6, and so on all the way up. So each one of those abilities is getting a little bit more damage, and you're not really controlling which one's going to get that enhanced damage, because you, once again, the ability you use at which stack of damage enhancements going to come down to how many combo points you get and the energy you get refunded back, as well as the proc on your clear casting abilities from Moment of Clarity being enhanced by the Eye Curio legendary. So Venthyr as an entire covenant though is very, very strong. Their soulbinds are very, very strong. Theotar is strong because it gives you that mastery amp. Nausea is still strong because she gives you that euphoria amp through Thrill Seeker, which is a haste buff, but it does give you a little bit of energy regeneration and speed and pace when it does it. Door of Shadows is a very useful ability as well when you're in outdoor content. So real quick, talking about the Kyrian Feral Druid then, I'm jumping over here to my Curie Sage on the beta, and I still believe that the Lone Empowerment buff that you get when you place it on yourself, the Lone Spirit buff, is going to be the way to go, because it's going to give you 15% increased damage to whatever you do. So 15% increased damage done, which is huge, especially on an opener. It's not going to be as bursty as the other two covenants with Convoke and with Ravenous Frenzy, but it will give you more of a consistent profile over the span of a long fight, which is why it's currently simming best inside raid environments, because you will have longer fights, and this will be up more often, and you can keep it up for about 20 seconds now. With the combat meditation, you can't keep it up 100% anymore. You can't keep it up for 20 seconds. In a Mythic Plus environment, collecting all those orbs as you're moving away, though, is not going to happen. So it would actually have less of an uptime than 20 seconds every single time, or you can just make sure to never proc this if you know that the group's going to move far anyway. That way you can make sure you collect those orbs to enhance its duration even further. With this build, I definitely would recommend the Balance Affinity just for that extra range, because you're going to be running around to collect your orbs, and then you're going to want to try to stay in range as much as you can in order to hit those targets. The ability does have utility modifiers with it as well, because you can place it on a healer and empower it, giving the healer some of your damage, and then you'll actually get a percentage of their healing duplicated onto you. So if they're sitting there spamming the tank and you know that you're going to need additional healing, you could place this on the healer to get that health back, and you can reapply this several times within a dungeon. It just has its cast time. So if you take it off, it's just going to have the 2.3 second cast, and then you can actually change that up in a dungeon, especially if there's a little lead time, or you guys are setting up for a pull and you want to replace this on a target, you can do that. If you place this on a tank, you can give the tank a damage reduction ability as well, and then if you take damage, you can redirect that damage back to the tank, and that could be a very useful utility situation inside of Mythic Plus as well. I don't like the damage ability as much as I do for the other abilities. It is far more consistent, and Pelagos is a very good soulbind, which allows you not only to have the combat meditation, which increases your mastery, but also have a straight versatility amp by just using alternating abilities, which we will be doing that fairly consistently because we're going to be reapplying bleeds all the time, so it won't be very hard to keep up the versatility amp, as well as have the combat meditation amp, which increases our mastery, and mastery is always good for Feral Druids. So this ability can definitely be very well utilized inside a Mythic Plus scenario. It's not going to give you that massive amount of burst that you can get from some of the other abilities, but it will give you a consistent damage modifier over the course of a dungeon. Utilizing this on a very big AoE pull and placing it on a Fire Mage or placing it on an MM Hunter when they're about to do their huge damage might actually be more damage than amplifying yourself. However, over the course of the dungeon, I don't think it's going to be worthwhile keeping it on unless those players are extremely pumping inside that dungeon, and then it might be, because if they're doing a huge amount more damage than you are putting out yourself, then it might be worthwhile doing that. And currently, MM Hunters and Fire Mages are doing really, really well. Boomkins are doing really, really well inside Mythic Plus. Frost Mages are doing very well inside Mythic Plus. So we'll see a lot of Mages. We'll see a lot of Hunters. That hasn't really changed. They were both inside the meta for the previous expansion as well. And if it comes to where they're just doing an immense amount more damage than you are inside a dungeon, and you're a Kyrian Feral Druid, then it might be worthwhile placing the damage amp on another damage dealer. Alright, so this last one, which is Necro Lord, and if you guys have seen any of my previous videos, I'm not a big fan of the Necro Lord. Inside a Mythic Plus scenario, it is by far not the go-to, and the reason simply is because Adaptive Swarm has no AoE capabilities to it. It is just a pure dot that you can place on a target for single target application. It'll enhance your bleeds, it'll also make them all shorter and do their damage faster. So it kind of gives you the legendary capability or the jagged wounds capability by itself, which is great for certain situations. However, in AoE, it's just not worth the GCD to press. It's just not doing enough damage on the targets to warrant taking it over any of the other burst abilities that you can. Even on a single target fight currently, because of our damage profile, our bleeds are not doing the majority of our damage on single target. Ferocious Bite and Shred are, and this is only enhancing those two. It does give you a damage dot and enhances your bleed, so it does have some damage potential for sure on single target, but it's definitely not going to be as valuable as the other Covenant abilities are over an entire dungeon damage profile. So you're looking at your overall dungeon damage and it's not doing a massive amount. So I don't have a whole lot more to say over the Covenant for Maldraxxus. The Fleshcraft ability is good survivability with inside a Mythic Plus setting. However, the rest of the Soulbind's abilities, there aren't a massive amount that play very well into the Mythic Plus scene. More of them are geared towards like a PvP content where CC immunity and so on is very valuable. I don't see too many of those coming into play inside the Mythic Plus scene though. Alright, so I've been going on about the Feral Druid and Mythic Plus and trying to give the best deep dive guide I can for the utility and the hidden factors that you can do while being a Feral Druid. The biggest one is now that Regrowth is not part of our rotation anymore, that you can utilize it for some very impactful healing over the group, as well as the addition of all of the other capabilities we have, making us very good at counteracting several affixes inside a group, as well as assisting with healing and healer mana respectively to make us very useful inside a dungeon group. It does take some planning and some practice, but we do have capabilities inside dungeons with having an uncapped AoE capability, which is going to play very massive inside the Shadowlands expansion, especially as we rank up in our stats. It's mainly crit stat, and get more damage out more frequently and fluidly, and all of it comes down to our resource generation inside the class with our combo points and our energy. And once we have enough of that, we can start amping into more damage profiling talents as well as legendaries to make us even stronger later on in the expansion. I hope this opened up the eyes to several individuals of what Feral Druids can bring to a group. And this is obviously not talking as much about the synergies that you can have with different kinds of classes inside a group. And this is more so talking about the synergies with inside Feral Druid that you can bring to a group. And then from that group, you can see how you can synergize depending on the classes and players that you're playing with. I do like the way Feral Druid plays. Obviously, I would like them to do more damage and possibly have a passive buff to give to raids in a raid environment. But in a Mythic Plus setting, I do like where they're at, and I definitely think we're only going to get stronger the further we go in this expansion, especially the moment that we can equip 2 legendaries. I think we're going to be very, very strong with some of the synergies that we have. But in this first tier, I think that we still will be valuable because of our uncapped and the utility we have while healing, and I definitely think that we can be very good in there. Will we be meta? Probably not, because of ranged being very meta for this first tier, this first season. However, I do think we have a lot of opportunity to be very good in Mythic Plus, and only time will tell. So let me know what you guys thought about this Mythic Plus deep dive guide. This was me trying to free talk the best I can so I can give you guys my truthful opinions without trying to script it out way too much. There are parts of this video that absolutely were scripted. However, I feel like most of my genuine opinion comes through when I'm just talking instead of typing it all out. And I hope that this came through in this video, and that you guys not only saw the value that Feral Druids can bring, but you saw the skill level that you can also have as a Feral Druid, and mainly that it does not require you to be listed as meta in order to be good at Mythic Plus. And not only is it that damage that you can bring to a group, but it's also the healing and survivability that you can help enhance from a group. I look forward to seeing what everybody has to say about this guide. And if you have any suggestions or you have any comments that you want to talk about that you think that I missed, or If you disagree with anything that I've said, please let me know inside the comments below, and I'd be happy to talk about it. If it's just going to be a comment saying that Feral Druid's going to be shit inside Shadowlands, that's not really adding to the conversation, and you're fair to have your own opinion. But I'm actually looking for people that want to talk about Feral Druids and see how we can further enhance our gameplay inside the Shadowlands. If you guys like this video and the content that I'm doing, please like and subscribe to the channel. It will help me out immensely. I am working very hard to get the subscriber numbers up so that we can get this channel more popular and that more people can see the ideas and views that I have on the Feral Druid itself. If you want to see me making this content or playing in the Shadowlands itself once it actually launches, you can always find me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/sageshifter. You can also find me over on Twitter and Instagram at sageshifter. Let's see what Feral Druids are capable in this expansion, and if the hidden utility that we have, or the utility that is untracked by most, is something that will make us more of a game changer inside the Mythic Plus setting going forward. Only time will tell, and it will take the Feral Druid community to actually show themselves more inside the Mythic Plus scene in order for people to actually see this utility, but I think that it will come through, and I'm hoping to be up there myself in this expansion. So looking forward to it, and I hope you all are too. As always, thank you guys very much for the support, and I will see you again next time.